the Christmas angel of Boston. Snow fell steadily over Boston, blanketing the streets in a soft, pristine layer. The city was alive with the sights and sounds of Christmas. Twinkling lights strung across storefronts, carolers singing on street corners, and the scent of roasted chestnuts wafting through the air. Yet for Claire Abbott, the season felt hollow. Claire tightened her scarf as she hurried through the crowded streets, clutching a paper bag filled with groceries. She was on her way home from a long day at work, where her role as a paralegal often left her drained. This year had been particularly hard. She had lost her mother in the spring, and the thought of spending Christmas alone in their once lively apartment filled her with dread. As she passed Boston Common, Claire paused to admire the giant Christmas tree in the center of the park. Its lights sparkled against the night sky, a dazzling beacon of cheer that contrasted sharply with her somber mood. She sighed and turned to leave, but her path was blocked by a man. He was tall, with a lean frame and an old-fashioned elegance that seemed out of place amidst the modern cityscape. His coat, a deep shade of burgundy, looked like it belonged in another era. But it was his eyes that struck Claire the most. Bright, piercing, and filled with a warmth that made her feel as if he could see straight into her soul. "Apologies," he said, stepping aside with a courteous nod. His voice was smooth, with a hint of an accent she couldn't place. "It's fine," Claire replied, trying to brush past him, but something about the man held her attention. "You look troubled," he said softly, his gaze steady but kind. "Christmas can be a difficult time for some." Claire frowned. It was an odd thing for a stranger to say, but somehow it didn't feel intrusive. "I've had a rough year," she admitted, surprising herself with her honesty. "The holidays just aren't the same anymore." The man tilted his head as if weighing her words. "Perhaps all you need is a little reminder of what Christmas truly means." Before Claire could respond, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, intricately carved wooden ornament in the shape of an angel. It was unlike anything she'd seen before, delicate, with fine details that made it look almost alive. "Take this," he said, pressing the ornament into her hand. "It's a gift." "I can't accept this," Claire protested, but the man shook his head. "Consider it a token of kindness," he said, his smile warm but mysterious. "You might be surprised at what a small gesture can do." And just like that, he was gone, disappearing into the bustling crowd before Claire could ask his name or return the ornament. Back in her apartment, Claire examined the angel more closely. Its craftsmanship was exquisite, with wings that seemed to shimmer faintly in the light. She placed it on her windowsill, feeling an odd sense of comfort as she watched the snow fall outside. The next morning, Claire awoke to the sound of laughter in the hallway. Curious, she opened her door to find her elderly neighbor, Mrs. Donnelly, chatting animatedly with a man who was helping her carry groceries. To Claire's astonishment, it was the same man she had met in the park. "Claire, dear," Mrs. Donnelly called out, "this kind gentleman was helping me with my bags. Isn't that sweet?" Claire blinked in confusion. "What are you doing here?" The man turned to her with the same warm smile, "Just lending a hand where it's needed." "Good morning, Miss Abbott. How do you know my name?" Claire asked, her voice edged with suspicion. Mrs. Donnelly looked between them, puzzled. "You two know each other?" "Not exactly," Claire muttered, but the man simply tipped his hat and said, "We've crossed paths before. Perhaps we were meant to again." Mrs. Donnelly beamed. "Well, isn't that lovely? Kindness is in short supply these days. We could all use a little more of it." As the man helped Mrs. Donnelly into her apartment, Claire stood in the hallway, her mind racing. Who was this stranger, and why did he seem to know so much about her? Throughout the day, Claire found herself noticing small but remarkable acts of kindness wherever she went. A man paid for a stranger's coffee in the cafe where she worked. A group of children handed out handmade cards to passers-by in the park. Each time, she thought of the man in the burgundy coat, as if his presence had somehow set these moments into motion. That evening, as she returned to her apartment, she spotted him again, standing beneath a street lamp outside her building. This time, she approached him directly. "Who are you?" she demanded. "And why do you keep showing up everywhere I go?" The man's smile was enigmatic. "Just someone who believes in the power of Christmas. It's a season of light, after all, and sometimes all it takes is a spark to reignite it." Claire shook her head, frustrated but intrigued. "That doesn't answer my question." "Perhaps not," he said, his tone gentle, "but you'll find that the answers you seek often come when you're ready to see them." Before she could press him further, he placed a hand over his heart and said, "Good night, Miss Abbott. May your Christmas be brighter than you expect." And once again, he vanished into the night, leaving Claire with more questions than answers and a flicker of hope she hadn't felt in months. The days that followed were filled with unexpected moments of joy that Claire couldn't quite explain. People seemed kinder, more patient. Small acts of generosity unfolded everywhere she looked. It was as if a ripple of goodness had been set into motion, and at its center was the man in the burgundy coat. Claire spotted him often, always in the middle of some act of kindness. One afternoon, she saw him at a soup kitchen, serving meals with a warm smile. Another time, he was playing a spirited game of chess with an elderly man in the park, drawing a small crowd that clapped when the game ended. Wherever he went, the air seemed lighter, the people happier. Claire couldn't shake her curiosity or her growing admiration. She had yet to learn his name, but he was becoming an undeniable presence in her life, like a character from a story who had stepped off the page. And yet, every time she tried to approach him, he would vanish before she could get any answers. It was a particularly cold evening when Claire returned to her apartment, her arms full of groceries. As she struggled with the bags, she heard a voice behind her. "Need some help?" She turned to find him standing there, his burgundy coat dusted with snow. His expression was as calm and kind as ever, and before she could respond, he had already taken the heavier bags from her arms. "You have a habit of appearing out of nowhere," Claire said as they climbed the stairs together. "Only when I'm needed," he replied with a smile. Inside her apartment, Claire set the bags down and turned to him. "You've been everywhere lately, helping people, spreading cheer. Who are you really? Why do you care so much?" The man placed the bags on her counter and looked at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Christmas is a time for giving," he said, "for remembering that even the smallest act of kindness can change a life. Sometimes people just need a little help finding their light again." Claire folded her arms, unconvinced. "That's a nice sentiment, but it doesn't explain why you're doing this. What's your story?" For a moment his gaze softened, and she thought he might reveal something about himself. But instead, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small tin of cookies, wrapped in festive ribbon. "For you," he said, placing it on the counter, "a gift." Claire blinked at the gesture, her curiosity replaced by a twinge of warmth. "You're impossible, you know that?" He chuckled, tipping an imaginary hat. "I'll take that as a compliment." Before she could press him further, he excused himself and left, leaving Claire alone with her thoughts and the cookies. The next morning, Claire decided to visit the community center where she had seen him working. She volunteered to help with their Christmas fundraiser, hoping it might give her a chance to learn more about him. To her surprise, the event was bustling with energy. Families laughed, children played, and a choir rehearsed carols in the corner. The atmosphere was contagious, and for the first time in months, Claire felt a glimmer of holiday cheer. As she helped sort donations, she spotted him across the room, arranging boxes of winter coats. This time, she wasn't going to let him disappear without answers. "You again," she said as she approached him. "Do you ever take a break?" He smiled, not at all surprised to see her. "Helping others doesn't feel like work." Claire shook her head in exasperation. "You're like some kind of Christmas guardian angel, always showing up exactly when someone needs you." He paused, a flicker of something unreadable crossing his face. "An angel?" he said softly, almost as if testing the word. That's a kind thought. Claire frowned. I was joking, but now you're making me wonder if I'm right. He chuckled, a sound like warm bells on a winter morning. Let's just say I believe in the spirit of the season. Their conversation was interrupted by a young boy tugging on the man's coat. Mister, can you help me find my mom? Of course, he said, kneeling to the boy's level. Let's go find her. Claire watched as he led the boy through the crowd, his every movement gentle and reassuring. It was as though kindness radiated from him, drawing people to him like moths to a flame. And yet, there was an air of mystery about him that Claire couldn't ignore. That evening, as she walked home, Claire replayed their conversation in her mind. The way he had spoken, the way he moved, it was all so deliberate, as if he had a purpose beyond what he revealed. Who was he, really? A philanthropist? A wanderer? Or something more? When she reached her apartment, she found an envelope tucked into her doorframe. Inside was a simple note written in elegant script. Kindness is the light of Christmas. Share it, and you'll find your own light too. There was no signature, but Claire didn't need one. She smiled, tucking the note into her pocket. Whoever he was, he had already begun to change her life in ways she couldn't fully understand. As she placed the angel ornament back on her windowsill, its faint shimmer catching the glow of the city lights, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. For the first time, she began to look forward to Christmas, not just as a holiday, but as a chance to rekindle the joy she thought she'd lost. Christmas Eve descended upon Boston in a flurry of snowflakes and twinkling lights. The city seemed to hum with anticipation, its streets alive with families rushing to finish their holiday preparations. Claire, however, found herself drawn back to the community center where the mysterious man in the burgundy coat had been working. Something inside her told her she would find him there one last time. The center was bustling with activity. Volunteers handed out gifts to children, the choir sang carols, and the scent of cinnamon and hot cocoa filled the air. Yet despite the warmth of the scene, Claire's gaze searched for him. Her heart sank when she couldn't find him among the cheerful crowd. Looking for someone? A voice said behind her. She turned and saw him, standing in the corner of the room, his coat dusted with fresh snow. He held a tray of cookies, his expression calm yet knowing. Claire's relief was immediate, and she crossed the room quickly to stand before him. You're like a ghost, she said, half smiling. Here one moment, gone the next. He chuckled softly. I prefer to think of it as being where I'm needed. Claire looked at him, searching his face for answers to the questions that had been swirling in her mind for weeks. Who are you, really? I've seen you do so much for people, bringing joy, helping strangers. You've made this Christmas feel magical. But I still don't know anything about you. The man placed the tray on a nearby table and met her gaze. His eyes, warm and piercing, held a depth that made her feel as though time had slowed. Do you believe in miracles, Claire? He asked gently. She hesitated, caught off guard by the question. I don't know, she admitted. I want to, but it's hard. Life has been complicated. He nodded as though he understood more than she could put into words. Miracles don't always come in grand gestures or unexplainable events. Sometimes they're found in the quiet moments, a kind word, a helping hand, a spark of hope when all seems lost. Claire felt a lump rise in her throat. You've been that spark, she said. For so many people, for me. But why? Why do you care so much? The man smiled, a gentle curve of his lips that carried both joy and sadness. Because that's my purpose. Before Claire could ask what he meant, a small girl approached them, her wide eyes fixed on the man. She held out a worn teddy bear with a missing ear. Mister, can you fix him? She asked. He knelt down, his face softening as he took the bear. Of course, he said, pulling a needle and thread from his pocket, as if he had known she would ask. Within moments, he had stitched the bear's ear back in place and handed it back to the girl, who beamed with delight. Thank you, she exclaimed before running off to show her family. Claire watched the exchange, her heart swelling. She turned back to him, but before she could speak, He straightened and gestured toward the door. "Come with me," he said. The snow had stopped, leaving the city blanketed in white under a clear, starry sky. The man led Claire to Boston Common, where the Christmas trees sparkled in the moonlight. The park was quiet, the usual bustle replaced by a serene stillness. "I wasn't always this way," he began, his voice low but steady. "I was once like you, living, working, struggling to make sense of the world, but I was given a second chance, a new purpose, to bring light to those who need it most." Claire stared at him, her breath visible in the cold air. "You're not human, are you?" He turned to her, his expression soft yet resolute. "Not anymore. I am what you might call a guardian, some would say an angel. My role is to remind people of the kindness, hope, and magic that make this season so special." The words hung in the air, and Claire felt a rush of emotions she couldn't quite name. "Why me?" she whispered. "Why did you choose to help me?" "Because you were ready," he said simply. "Even if you didn't know it, you've carried pain and doubt, but you've also carried a deep capacity for love and generosity. You just needed a little reminder." Tears pricked at Claire's eyes as she thought about the past few weeks. The moments of joy, the acts of kindness, the sense of hope she hadn't felt in years. "What happens now?" she asked. He smiled, the kind of smile that felt like an embrace. "Now, you carry that light forward. Share it with others. Keep it alive." Claire nodded, her heart full yet aching at the thought of saying goodbye. "Will I ever see you again?" The man reached into his pocket and pulled out another ornament, a delicate angel, similar to the one he had given her before, but shimmering with a soft golden glow. He pressed it into her hand. "Whenever you see this, remember that the spirit of Christmas is always with you, and so am I." As she looked down at the ornament, a tear slid down her cheek. When she glanced up again, he was gone, his footsteps already fading into the snow. Christmas morning dawned bright and clear. Claire woke with a sense of peace she hadn't felt in years. She placed the glowing ornament next to the first one on her windowsill, the two angels catching the light like tiny beacons. She spent the day volunteering at the community center, sharing smiles and warmth with everyone she met. And as she walked home that evening, her heart full, she glanced at the sky. A single bright star shone above the city, and she couldn't help but smile. She believed in miracles now. After all, she had met one. The end.